Hi, I'm Dan Nichole. Welcome to Layout Building. In this episode, we're going to continue working on our O-scale game room display layout. After a long time and a lot of work, our game room is nearing completion. The plan is to build a shelf layout below the soffit around the edges of the room up near the ceiling. This is going to be a simple display loop with no turnouts, and we're doing it in 3-rail O-scale. In the last episode, we cut the shelves to length and test fit them before applying a combination stain and polyurethane finish. In this episode, we'll be hanging the shelves and installing the track. Before starting any of that, I wanted to do an experiment. I've been warned that Fastrack is noisy, so I decided to try a few different materials to see what worked best to dampen the sound. I should mention that the game room has a lot of natural reverb right now since there's a bare concrete floor and no furniture, and that tends to amplify noises. I'm sure this will get better when the room is completely finished. With the shelves still on the floor, I set some track on them. None of the track is fastened down. My control for this experiment is a piece of track on the shelf with nothing under it. I expect this will be the noisiest. The white material is shelf liner. This is some HO scale cork roadbed. And finally, this is some 1/8 inch thick neoprene rubber material that I found on Amazon. I also tested some foam rubber. Both subjectively and looking at the decibel meters in my video software, all of these materials worked about the same. They all reduced the overall noise slightly, about 2 to 3 decibels. Subjectively, all the materials help to dampen the high frequency noises, which to my ears anyway makes it more tolerable. In short, any of these materials under the track would be better than nothing. Since the neoprene is available in 4-inch wide rolls, just slightly wider than the roadbed, I decided to go with that. I won't need to do as much cutting that way. I had an extra 1/4 inch of vertical clearance above the NMRA gauge when I set the shelf height, so there's enough room to use the 1/8 inch thick material. The 4-inch rolls will be for the straight sections. The rolls have plastic to keep the rubber from sticking to itself, but it doesn't have any adhesive on it. I bought some wider pieces for the corners, which will require some cutting. Hanging the corner shelves is definitely a 2-person job. Nichole and I put them up first, using the brackets we installed previously. I decided to start on the ends of the room first. Just like I did in the last episode, I've clamped some scrap wood to the corners as temporary supports. The small piece on the top is there to keep the clamp from denting the finished shelf. Now I need to install the dowel pins in the back wall shelf. I talked about using dowel pins in the last episode. Now it's time to see how well it works. Because of the tight clearances, I wasn't able to get video of me actually installing the pins. It took some effort, but they all went in. Now the back piece is attached to the corners. I didn't use any glue on the pins. Even though this area is too high to be readily visible, the plastic caps I got to cover the holes give it a more finished appearance. Finally, I'll screw the shelf to the brackets from the top. Now the moment of truth. I'm removing the clamps. I couldn't resist doing a little test to see what the shelf will look like with trains on it. The installation procedure for the shelf at the other end of the room is the same as for the back wall. With the ends of the room completed, I can turn my attention to the sides. When I set up the side shelves, I glued dowel pins on one end only, facing the back wall. I'll start at the back of the room and work my way forward. You might recall from the last episode that I labeled the ends of each board with a letter. The idea was that when it came time to install the finished shelves, I'd just have to match the letters on each side of each seam. Unfortunately, some of my labels got covered in the staining process. Thankfully, enough are still visible that I can figure out the order that they go in. The last piece toward the front of the room on each side is easy since those pieces have holes on one end just like the shelves on the ends of the room. I've placed the boards on the train room side in their proper order. Now I'll set the first piece on the brackets near the back of the room. Once the shelf is sitting on the brackets, I can slide it back to engage the pins. I'll repeat the process for all the boards along the wall. I'm not screwing these down yet. Some of the pieces need a little coaxing with a mallet to go together. The shelves on the train room side look like they're fitting pretty well. I'll go ahead and screw them down. I did the cottage side of the room the same way. Now the shelves are complete. Now comes the fun part. I get to delve into this huge box of Lionel Fastrack that I've been saving for months. Fastrack is pretty simple to use. The rails are hollow with pins in the ends that snap together. This is a different system than the solid rail with rail joiners used on many other types of track. It's an updated version of the same system that Lionel used on their older style track, and it seems pretty robust. The track has built-in roadbed with screw holes to fasten it down. I'm not going to attach it just yet. First, I want to set up the track on the shelf so I can figure out exactly where it goes. Math isn't my best subject, but it looks like my calculations for how much track I'd need were correct. I had just enough to make the loop around the room. These small pieces are all that's left over. I set up a terminal section near the banana plug connectors that I built into the wall. There's another terminal section on the opposite side of the room, just in case I get a lot of voltage drop and want a second place to feed power to the track. I'm not planning to connect it unless I need to. Before putting the track down permanently, I added a few small angle brackets in certain places where I thought the shelf was misaligned or where it wiggled more than I'd like. I'm going to start laying track on the bridge since the placement of the track there is the most critical. The shelves are wide enough that I have some wiggle room in most other places. My plan is to sandwich the rubber material between the track and the shelf. Using the 1/8 inch neoprene underlayment will also help to solve the problem of getting the track over the brackets on the end walls since those are above the shelf. I found these screws which fit the holes in the roadbed pretty well. I'll put down a piece of rubber first. I cut out a small amount of material where the rubber crosses the plastic hole covers. I don't want anything that could create bumps and push the track out of level. Now I can place the track on top. I'll screw it down on one end only for now. I'm going to work my way down the wall, just placing the rubber in the track. Normally I use my eye to sight down the track to make sure it's straight, but the space is too tight. I'll use my phone's camera instead. I'll make adjustments until I'm satisfied that it's straight. Then I'll start screwing the rest down. I'm not putting a screw into every single hole, but I'm using enough to hold the track firmly. The neoprene is not very flexible side to side and won't bend around corners like cork would. I've set one of my 072 curves on a piece of the wider neoprene. I've lined up one end with the end of the roll. I'll cut the other end to match the angle of the track. Then I'll carefully trim the excess material from the sides. Now I have a curved piece to go under the track section. I'll need to make 4 of these per corner. It looks like the curve fits on the roadbed pretty well. I'll go ahead and install it. Before I can do that, there's one more wrinkle. I'll need to notch the neoprene to fit around the bracket. It's hard to see, but I drew cut lines with a Sharpie. Now it fits. Fortunately, the track isn't making contact with the screw heads on the bracket. I'll need to make some more cuts to deal with all the other brackets on the end walls. It looks like I'll need to modify the straight sections along the back wall in a couple spots to clear the bracket screws. For the train room wall, I've aligned the far end so that it will be in the right place to match up with the track that runs across the door at the front of the room. Since I'm screwing things down from the back going forward on this side, I need to make sure that I maintain that alignment to keep the track straight. I'm using my laser level to project a line down the track. As I go, I'm being careful to keep the track along this line. Despite all my planning, when trying to fit the track at the front of the room, it ended up a little closer to the edge of the shelf than I wanted. In order to get the track along the front wall in the right place, I had to buy a couple of these short sections. These are 1 3/8 inches long and they have a gap in the middle rail. They're designed so that they can be used to create isolated electrical blocks just by cutting the jumper wire on the bottom. I don't need to do that on this simple layout, so I'll leave the jumper in place. Using one short section on each side, move the track back to the middle of the shelf where it belongs. And now the loop is complete. It's time for the golden spike ceremony. Well, it's actually a brass screw, but it's the closest thing I have that will work here. I think that's a good place to leave things for now. Next time we'll finish the bridge, wire up the track, and see if we can run a train. Nichole and I are really happy with the way the layout is turning out so far. You might have noticed that my model of 3751 isn't in here anymore, and that's because it's moved out to the game room to be on its new track. Hopefully next time we'll get it running. Stay tuned and thanks for watching.